The message I sent to my son from my lawyer's office in the Cayman Islands was simple. Your inheritance is now safely protected from those who would harm your mother. Wish you understood sooner. Along with it, I attached a photo of myself signing the final offshore trust documents, my medication organizer clearly visible on the mahogany table beside the paperwork. 3 weeks earlier, my daughter-in-law had told me I was imagining things when I couldn't find my blood pressure pills. What she didn't know was that the trust fund my late husband had left for our son, worth $2.3 million, had always been under my complete control until I chose to release it. As I watched the Caribbean sunset through the law firm's windows, I finally felt like I was breathing freely again. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning routine had become second nature over the past 15 years. Every Sunday, I would sit at my kitchen table with 7 small plastic containers, methodically sorting pills by day and time. Blue ones for blood pressure, white ones for cholesterol, tiny yellow tablets for my thyroid. At 72, Margaret Sinclair had learned that consistency meant survival. My name is Margaret Sinclair, and precision has defined my life. 45 years as a certified public accountant had trained me to notice discrepancies, to catch the smallest errors that others might overlook. After retiring 8 years ago, I'd transferred those same meticulous habits to managing my health, my finances, and the comfortable routine I'd built in my Tudor-style home in Westchester County, New York. The house felt too large sometimes, especially in the evenings when the silence reminded me how much I missed Harold. My husband had been gone for 3 years now, taken by a sudden stroke that no amount of careful planning could have prevented. But the life insurance, the investments, the trust fund he'd established for our son Michael, those had been planned with characteristic precision. Harold had been a financial planner himself, and he'd structured everything to protect our family's future. Michael lived just 20 minutes away in a gleaming suburban development with his wife Ashley and their twin daughters, Sophia and Grace. The girls were 8 now, bright and energetic, and they brought joy to my carefully ordered world during our weekly Sunday dinners. Michael had inherited his father's steady nature, working as an engineering manager at an aerospace company. He was reliable, thoughtful, and had never given me a moment's worry. Ashley was a different story entirely. She'd married Michael 6 years ago, and from the beginning, something about her had struck me as calculating. Not malicious, exactly, but strategic in a way that made me uncomfortable. Ashley worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveling frequently, always impeccably dressed, and perpetually focused on what she called optimizing outcomes. She spoke about everything, from vacation destinations to school choices for the girls, in terms of cost-benefit analysis. Margaret really should consider a retirement community. I'd overheard her telling Michael one evening when they thought I was in the bathroom. The maintenance on that big house, the property taxes, the isolation. It's not sustainable long-term, and honestly, it's not fair to expect us to constantly check on her. I'd said nothing that night, but the conversation had lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. At 72, I was hardly isolated. I had my book club, my weekly bridge games, my volunteer work at the animal shelter. My health was good, my mind sharp, and my finances more than adequate. The house was paid off, and Harold's life insurance, combined with our retirement savings, meant I would never be a burden to anyone. Still, Ashley's comment revealed something important about how she viewed me. As a problem to be solved, an asset to be managed, an obstacle to be optimized around. The trust fund Harold had established for Michael was substantial. $2.3 million accumulated over decades of careful investing and planning. Harold had structured it so that I maintained complete control as trustee until I decided to transfer it, or until my death, whichever came first. The arrangement had been Harold's idea, born from his observation that Michael, while responsible, sometimes lacked the assertiveness to stand up to Ashley's more expensive impulses. "Let Margaret decide when he's ready," Harold had told his attorney. "She'll know when the time is right." I'd never mentioned the specific amount to Michael or Ashley, though they knew some inheritance existed. In my mind, it was insurance for their future, college funds for the girls, security for their retirement, protection against unexpected hardships. But I'd also watched Ashley's spending habits with growing concern. The designer handbags, the frequent spa weekends, The insistence on private school for the girls despite excellent public schools in their district. My own financial situation was comfortable but separate. The house, my retirement accounts, and a modest trust Harold had set up for my care were mine to manage. I'd always been careful with money, a habit formed during the lean early years of our marriage when Harold was building his practice and I was working my way up from bookkeeper to CPA. Those Sunday pill-sorting sessions had become a kind of meditation, a quiet time to plan the week ahead and reflect on the past. This particular Sunday in early September felt different, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The late summer heat was finally breaking, and the first hints of autumn were visible in the maple tree outside my kitchen window. I was reaching for the blood pressure medication when I noticed something odd. The bottle felt lighter than it should have. I shook it gently, only a few pills rattled inside. According to my careful tracking system, there should have been at least 15 pills remaining. I always ordered refills when I got down to a 10-day supply, and I'd just picked up this prescription 4 days ago. A careful count confirmed my suspicion. Only 6 pills remained. Either the pharmacy had made an error, or someone had taken pills from the bottle. Given my decades of experience catching numerical discrepancies, I trusted my count more than I trusted coincidence. I checked the other medications. The cholesterol pills seemed correct, but the thyroid medication was also low. 3 pills missing by my calculation. A cold realization settled in my stomach. Someone had been in my medication, and there was only one person besides myself who had regular access to my kitchen. Ashley had been stopping by more frequently over the past month, ostensibly to check on me but often arriving when I was out running errands. She had a key. Michael had insisted I give one to both of them after Harold died for emergencies. I'd noticed small signs that someone had been in the house. A coffee mug in the dishwasher that I didn't remember using, magazines stacked differently on the living room table, the thermostat adjusted to a temperature I never chose. At the time, I'd attributed these changes to my own forgetfulness, the natural slowing of an aging mind. Now I wondered if they indicated something more deliberate. The implications were staggering. Blood pressure medication was serious business. Missing doses could lead to dangerous spikes, potential strokes, heart attacks. The thyroid medication was equally critical for regulating my metabolism and energy levels. If someone was deliberately removing these pills, they were essentially sabotaging my health. But why would Ashley do such a thing? What could she possibly gain from making me sick? The answer came to me with horrible clarity. A sick, confused, or incapacitated Margaret would be much easier to convince that she needed help managing her affairs. An aging woman who couldn't remember to take her medication properly might be deemed incompetent to handle her own finances. And an incompetent trustee would need to be replaced. I spent the rest of that Sunday in a state of controlled fury, my accountant's mind working through the possibilities and implications. If Ashley was indeed tampering with my medication, it represented a level of calculation and cruelty that took my breath away. But it also represented something else. A serious miscalculation of who she was dealing with. Margaret Sinclair had spent 45 years managing other people's money, catching embezzlers, identifying fraud, and protecting assets from those who would misuse them. I dealt with bitter divorces, contested estates, and family members who would do anything to get their hands on money they felt entitled to. I knew how to gather evidence, how to protect assets, and how to make people very sorry they'd underestimated me. Monday morning, I drove to my doctor's office without an appointment. Dr. Patricia Reeves had been my physician for over a decade, and her nurse managed to squeeze me in between other patients. I explained my concerns about the missing medication, carefully avoiding any accusations or suspicions about family members. "It's possible you simply miscounted," Dr. Reeves suggested gently. "Many of my older patients struggle with medication management. There are some excellent automated dispensing systems that might help." I bristled at the implication but kept my voice level. "Doctor, I've been managing complex financial accounts for 4 decades. I assure you, my counting skills remain intact. Someone has been removing medication from my bottles." Dr. Reeves ordered blood tests to check my current medication levels and prescribed temporary supplies to bridge any gaps. She also recommended I consider discussing the situation with my family, perhaps asking for help with medication management. Sometimes family members worry about medication errors and take it upon themselves to intervene, she said diplomatically. It usually comes from a place of love, even if it's misguided. Love. I doubted that was Ashley's motivation. That afternoon, I called Harold's old law firm and made an appointment with David Chen, the estate attorney, who had helped us structure the trust. If Ashley was making a play for control of Michael's inheritance, I needed to understand exactly what options I had to protect it. The law office occupied the top floor of a glass building in White Plains, with windows overlooking the Hudson River. David was younger than Harold's original attorney, but he'd handled the transfer of our account when his predecessor retired. He greeted me with the same respectful attention he'd shown during our previous meetings. "Mrs. Sinclair, always a pleasure. How can I help you today?" I explained my concerns about the medication tampering, careful to present facts rather than speculation. David listened with the trained neutrality of someone accustomed to family drama surrounding money. "The trust structure your husband created gives you complete discretion as trustee," he confirmed, pulling up the documents on his computer. "You can distribute funds, change investment strategies, or even revoke the trust entirely if you deem it necessary. The beneficiary, Michael, has no legal standing to demand distribution until you choose to provide it. And if someone were attempting to have me declared incompetent?" David's expression grew more serious. "That would require a legal proceeding, with medical evidence and court approval. It's not something that can be done lightly or secretly. However, if you're concerned about potential challenges to your capacity, there are steps we can take to strengthen your position." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. We discussed various protective measures, updated medical evaluations to document my competency, video recordings of our meetings to demonstrate my clear thinking, and most intriguingly, the option to move assets to offshore trusts that would be much more difficult for anyone else to access or challenge. "Offshore trusts are perfectly legal for asset protection," David explained. "Many of our clients use them to shield wealth from potential lawsuits, creditor claims, or family disputes. The Cayman Islands, in particular, have very strong privacy laws and don't recognize foreign court orders to seize assets." The idea was appealing, though I wanted to gather more evidence before taking such a dramatic step. If Ashley was indeed tampering with my medication, I needed proof that would hold up in court and justify my actions to Michael. That evening, I implemented the first phase of my investigation. I used a fine-tipped marker to make tiny dots on each pill bottle, marking the exact level of remaining medication. I also installed a small security camera in my kitchen, disguised as a decorative clock on the counter. The device was motion-activated and would upload footage directly to my smartphone. The waiting began. Ashley's next visit came 3 days later. I was at my Thursday morning bridge club when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the kitchen camera. By the time I made my excuses and drove home, Ashley's car was gone, but the evidence was clear. The security footage showed her entering my kitchen with her own key, going directly to the medication cabinet, and carefully removing pills from 3 different bottles. She counted them methodically before slipping them into a small plastic bag and leaving. The entire process took less than 5 minutes, executed with the efficiency of someone who had done it before. But the most chilling part was her expression. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no sign that she considered her actions wrong. She moved through my kitchen with the casual confidence of someone managing a routine task. I sat in my living room, watching the footage repeatedly, my hands shaking with rage. This wasn't a misguided attempt to help me manage my medication. This was deliberate sabotage, designed to make me appear confused, forgetful, and incompetent. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Gradually reduce my medication compliance, wait for my health to deteriorate, then step in as the concerned family member worried about my declining capacity. What Ashley hadn't counted on was dealing with someone who had spent decades catching people trying to steal money. She'd chosen the wrong target, And now I was going to make sure she understood exactly how costly that mistake would be. The next morning, I called David Chen and scheduled an emergency meeting. It was time to move the inheritance somewhere Ashley could never touch it, no matter what happened to me. If she wanted to play games with my health and my family's future, she was about to learn that I'd been playing financial chess since before she was born. The war had begun, and Ashley had already lost. She just didn't know it yet. David Chen's office felt different this time, charged with the urgency of my situation. I'd brought printed screenshots from the security footage, my medication tracking spreadsheet, and a written timeline of Ashley's suspicious behavior. David reviewed everything with the methodical attention I appreciated in financial professionals. "This is quite serious, Mrs. Sinclair. What you're describing could constitute elder abuse, potentially even attempted poisoning depending on how a prosecutor might view it." The weight of those words settled over me. I'd been thinking in terms of family conflict and financial protection, but David was right. This was criminal behavior that could have killed me. "My immediate concern is protecting Michael's inheritance," I said firmly. "Whatever Ashley's endgame is, I won't let her benefit from harming me." David pulled up several documents on his computer. "Given the evidence you've collected, I'd recommend we move quickly on multiple fronts. The offshore trust option we discussed would place the assets beyond the reach of any U.S. court order, even if someone successfully challenged your competency." He explained the mechanics of establishing a trust in the Cayman Islands. The process would take about 2 weeks and require my physical presence to sign the final documents. The assets would be managed by a professional trustee, but I would retain complete control over distributions through a carefully structured power of appointment. "What about Michael?" I asked. "He's the intended beneficiary. This isn't about punishing him. The trust can be structured so that Michael receives distributions on any schedule you determine," David assured me. "You could provide for his children's education, for example, or establish milestone-based distributions. The key difference is that no one else, including a spouse, could access or redirect those funds without your explicit approval." The plan was elegant. Ashley's scheme depended on either gaining control of me or convincing a court that I was incompetent to manage the trust. By moving the assets offshore and documenting my clear thinking throughout the process, I would effectively checkmate her strategy while protecting Michael's inheritance from her future financial decisions. "There's one more element I'd recommend," David continued. "We should document everything. Video recordings of our meetings, medical evaluations confirming your competency, detailed records of the medication tampering. If this ever goes to court, we want an overwhelming paper trail proving you were of sound mind when you made these decisions." I agreed to everything. That afternoon, I visited Dr. Reeves again, this time requesting a comprehensive cognitive evaluation to document my mental state. The battery of tests took 3 hours and covered everything from memory and reasoning to spatial awareness and decision-making capacity. The results, which arrived the following week, confirmed what I already knew. My cognitive function was well within normal ranges for my age, with several areas scoring above average. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence of Ashley's activities. The security camera captured 2 more incidents of medication tampering over the next week. She varied her timing, sometimes during my morning walks, once during my afternoon grocery run, but her method remained consistent. The careful counting, the systematic removal of pills, the casual efficiency that spoke of practice. I also began documenting the physical effects of her sabotage. Missing doses of blood pressure medication caused noticeable symptoms: headaches, dizziness, fatigue that I'd previously attributed to normal aging. With Dr. Reeves's help, I started taking my blood pressure twice daily, creating a clear record of the dangerous spikes that occurred when Ashley had been to my house. The most disturbing discovery came when I reviewed older security footage from cameras I'd installed after a neighborhood break-in 6 months earlier. Ashley had been tampering with my medication for at least 4 months, possibly longer. The realization explained several incidents I'd dismissed at the time: a fall in my garden that I'd blamed on uneven ground, a dizzy spell at the grocery store that had embarrassed me, several nights of insomnia that had left me feeling confused and irritable. Ashley had been systematically undermining my health for months, waiting for the cumulative effects to become obvious to others. It was a long-term strategy that demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty that took my breath away. But her plan had a fatal flaw. She'd underestimated her target. I wasn't some helpless elderly woman struggling with the complexities of modern life. I was a trained financial professional with decades of experience protecting assets from people exactly like her. The offshore trust documents arrived from the Cayman Islands law firm David had recommended. The paperwork was extensive: establishment documents, powers of appointment, investment directives, and beneficiary designations. I spent an entire weekend reviewing every clause, drawing on my professional experience to understand the implications and protections each provision offered. The structure was brilliant. The trust would be established under Cayman Islands law, with a professional trustee managing the assets according to my written instructions. I would retain a power of appointment that allowed me to direct distributions, change beneficiaries, or even revoke the trust entirely. But these powers would be exercised through the Cayman trustee, making the assets effectively unreachable by U.S. courts. Michael would remain the primary beneficiary, but distributions would be made according to a Schedule 1 determined. I planned to fund the girls' college educations directly, provide for Michael's retirement, and establish emergency funds for genuine family needs. What the trust wouldn't do was provide Ashley with access to a lump sum she could redirect toward her own priorities. The final step required my physical presence in the Cayman Islands to sign the establishment documents and transfer the initial assets. I booked a flight for the following week, telling Michael the first was taking a short vacation to clear my head after the stress of dealing with my medication issues. "That's great, Mom," Michael said when I called to let him know my plans. "Ashley was just saying you seemed a bit scattered lately. Maybe some time away will help." Ashley had been saying I seemed scattered. Of course she had. She was already building the narrative that would support a competency challenge, planting seeds of concern about my mental state. The manipulation was so thorough, so systematic, that I almost admired its sophistication. Almost. 3 days before my departure, I decided it was time to let Ashley know that I was aware of her activities. Not to confront her directly, but to observe her reaction and gather more evidence of her intentions. I called Michael and Ashley's house, knowing Ashley would be home while Michael was at work and the girls were at school. "Ashley, it's Margaret. I wanted to let you know I've been having some problems with my medication lately. Pills seem to be missing from my bottles, and my doctor is concerned about potential medication errors." The brief silence before Ashley responded told me everything I needed to know. "Oh my goodness, Margaret, that's concerning. Are you sure you're remembering to take them correctly? Sometimes stress can affect memory, and I know you've been under a lot of pressure lately." The gaslighting was immediate and expert. Ashley wasn't just denying involvement. She was reinforcing the narrative that I was becoming confused and unreliable. "I'm quite certain about my medication management," I replied calmly. "In fact, I've installed security cameras to help identify what might be happening." Another pause, this one longer. "Security cameras? Margaret, that seems a bit extreme. Have you discussed this with Michael? Maybe we should all sit down and talk about some additional support systems." There it was, the pivot to involving Michael, the suggestion that I needed support systems, the careful implication that my response to the problem was evidence of the problem itself. Ashley was very good at this. "I'll discuss it with Michael when I return from my trip," I said. "I'm taking a vacation to the Caribbean next week. I think some time away will help me gain perspective on the situation." "The Caribbean?" Ashley's voice sharpened with interest. "That sounds expensive. Are you sure that's wise right now, given your health concerns?" She was fishing for information about my finances, probably wondering if I was showing signs of poor judgment in money management. "Perfect. Oh, I can afford it," I said cheerfully. "In fact, I'm meeting with some financial advisors while I'm there. Harold set up some international accounts years ago, and it's time I took a more active role in managing them." The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had been disconnected. "International accounts?" Ashley finally asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Nothing too exciting," I replied. "Just some offshore investments Harold established for tax purposes. You know how complicated these financial matters can be." After ending the call, I sat back and smiled. I'd just given Ashley exactly the information she needed to panic. The woman who'd been systematically poisoning me in hopes of gaining control over Michael's inheritance had just learned that there were significant assets she didn't know about. managed through offshore accounts she couldn't access or even investigate. Within an hour, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, Ashley told me about your medication concerns and your trip to the Caribbean. She's worried about you traveling alone, especially if you're having health issues." "I'm fine, Michael. Just taking a precautionary vacation." "She also mentioned something about offshore accounts?" "Mom, that doesn't sound like something Dad would have done. Are you sure you're remembering this correctly?" Ashley had wasted no time planting seeds of doubt about my memory and judgment. She was moving faster now, probably realizing that her window of opportunity was closing. "Your father was quite sophisticated in his financial planning," I said calmly. "There are many aspects of our estate structure that we never discussed with you. Perhaps it's time we had a comprehensive conversation about these matters when I return." "Maybe we should have that conversation before you travel," Michael suggested. "Ashley thinks we should all meet with your financial advisor together, just to make sure everything is properly organized." Of course, Ashley wanted to meet with my financial advisor. She wanted to understand exactly what assets existed and how to access them. But she was too late. By the time I returned from the Cayman Islands, the assets would be beyond her reach, protected by privacy laws and legal structures she couldn't penetrate. "That's a lovely idea for when I return," I agreed. "Right now I need to focus on my health and get some rest. The Caribbean sunshine will do me good." The next few days passed quickly as I finalized my travel arrangements and prepared for the asset transfer. David Chen scheduled a final meeting to review all the documentation and ensure I understood every aspect of the offshore trust structure. "Once you sign these documents and transfer the assets," he reminded me, "reversing the process will be complicated and expensive. Are you certain this is the path you want to take?" I thought about Ashley's face on the security footage, the casual efficiency with which she'd counted out pills that were keeping me alive. I thought about the months of systematic sabotage, the gaslighting phone conversation, the immediate attempt to involve Michael in questioning my judgment. "I'm certain," I replied. "My husband worked his entire life to provide security for our son. I won't allow someone to steal that inheritance by harming me." David nodded and sealed the documents in a courier envelope for transport to the Cayman Islands. Everything was ready. That evening, I sat in Harold's study, looking at the family photos that lined the shelves. Michael as a baby, as a Little League player, at his college graduation, at his wedding to Ashley. In that last photo, Ashley's smile seemed different, now that I knew what she was capable of. It wasn't the joy of a new bride, but the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully positioned herself for future opportunities. Harold had been right to structure the trust with protective provisions. He'd seen something in Ashley that I'd dismissed as mere materialism. But Harold's protections had assumed the threat would come through poor financial decisions or spending habits, not through systematic elder abuse designed to gain control of the assets. Tomorrow I would fly to the Cayman Islands and ensure that Ashley's scheme would fail completely. But more than that, I would reclaim control over my own life and health, free from the fear of someone who would hurt me for money. The war was about to shift decisively in my favor. Ashley had made her move too early and revealed her intentions too clearly. Now it was time for her to learn the consequences of targeting someone who'd spent decades protecting people's assets from exactly her type of predatory behavior. As I packed my suitcase that night, I included the security camera footage, my medication tracking records, and Dr. Reeves's cognitive evaluation. If Ashley wanted a fight, she would get one, but it would be fought on my terms, with my resources, according to rules she didn't even know existed. The plane tickets to Georgetown were in my purse, along with David Chen's business card and the contact information for the Cayman Islands law firm. In less than 48 hours, $2.3 million would disappear from Ashley's potential reach forever. She'd tried to steal my health, my competency, and my son's inheritance. Instead, she was about to lose everything she'd schemed for, and I was going to enjoy every moment of her realization that she'd chosen the wrong target. The Caribbean sunshine was going to feel wonderful. The flight from JFK to Georgetown passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. I spent the 3-hour journey reviewing the trust documents one final time, making notes in the margins with the precision that had defined my accounting career. Every clause had been scrutinized, every contingency considered. By the time we touched down in the Cayman Islands, I felt the calm confidence that comes from thorough preparation. The Georgetown airport was smaller than I'd expected, with customs officials who processed my entry with efficient courtesy. The tropical heat hit me as I stepped outside, a welcome contrast to the autumn chill I'd left behind in New York. My taxi driver, a cheerful man named Winston who spoke with the musical accent of the islands, chatted about the weather and local attractions as we drove through the capital. "First time in Cayman?" he asked, navigating the left-hand traffic with easy skill. "Yes, though I wish the circumstances were different," I replied, watching palm trees and coral stone buildings pass by the window. "Business or pleasure?" "A bit of both," I said, which was true enough. Protecting my family's assets from a predatory daughter-in-law was certainly business, but there was going to be considerable pleasure in watching Ashley's reaction when she realized her scheme had failed. The Ritz-Carlton Grand Cayman rose from the shoreline like a testament to understated luxury. I'd chosen it not for indulgence but for its business center and private meeting rooms. Important financial decisions deserved appropriate settings, and I wanted everything about this trip documented in case Ashley tried to challenge my mental state later. After checking in, I walked along 7 Mile Beach, letting the warm sand between my toes ground me in the reality of what I was about to accomplish. The Caribbean Sea stretched endlessly before me, its turquoise clarity a stark contrast to the murky deception I'd been navigating at home. For the first time in months, I felt my blood pressure normalize without medication adjustments. That evening, I called Michael from my hotel room, calculating the time difference to catch him after work. "Mom, how's your vacation?" Ashley was asking if you'd arrived safely. I'm sure she was. Ashley was probably counting the hours until my return, preparing for whatever final phase of her manipulation she had planned. "The island is beautiful, Michael. Very peaceful. I had lunch with a lovely couple from Toronto who've been coming here for years. They gave me some excellent recommendations for tomorrow's activities." It was a harmless lie, designed to reinforce the image of a competent traveler managing her affairs independently. Every detail of this trip would matter if Ashley tried to paint me as confused or declining. "That's great, Mom." Ashley suggested maybe I should have come with you, just to make sure everything went smoothly. "How thoughtful of her," I replied dryly. "But I'm quite capable of managing a simple vacation, Michael. I booked flights, arranged accommodation, and navigated international travel successfully. I think that demonstrates reasonable competency for a woman my age." Michael chuckled, missing the underlying message entirely. "Of course it does. Ashley's just protective of you, especially with your recent health concerns." My recent health concerns. Ashley had poisoned me for months, then positioned herself as the caring family member worried about my declining condition. The manipulation was so complete that my own son couldn't see through it. "I'm feeling much better already," I said truthfully. Amazing what proper medication compliance can accomplish. After ending the call, I ordered room service and spent the evening reviewing financial statements on my laptop. The trust assets were currently held in conservative investments, treasury bonds, blue-chip stocks, and certificates of deposits that Harold had selected for stability rather than growth. Moving them offshore wouldn't change the underlying investments, but it would place them under a completely different legal jurisdiction with much stronger privacy protections. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for the most important business meeting of my life. I dressed carefully in a navy suit that projected competence and authority, then took a taxi to the law offices of Blackwood Morrison and Associates, located in a sleek building overlooking the harbor. Marcus Blackwood was exactly what I'd hoped for in an offshore attorney, impeccably credentialed, thoroughly professional, and completely discreet. His office was appointed with understated elegance, featuring original artwork and furniture that spoke of successful international practice. "Mrs. Sinclair, welcome to the Cayman Islands. David Chen spoke very highly of you, and I've reviewed all the preliminary documentation. This is quite an impressive estate structure your late husband created." We spent the first hour reviewing the proposed trust documents line by line. Marcus explained the Cayman Islands' legal protections for offshore trusts, including the 20-year statute of limitations on challenges and the requirement that any legal action be filed in Cayman courts under Cayman law. Even if someone obtained a U.S. court order attempting to seize these assets, Marcus explained, Cayman law doesn't recognize foreign judgments against properly established trusts. The assets would be completely protected. The trust structure itself was elegant, I would transfer the existing assets to a Cayman Islands company wholly owned by the trust. The trust would be managed by Blackwood's firm as professional trustees, but I would retain complete control through a power of appointment that allowed me to direct any distributions or changes to beneficiaries. What about ongoing management? I asked. I want to ensure Michael receives appropriate support for genuine needs while preventing anyone else from accessing the funds. Marcus showed me the distribution framework we'd developed. The trust would pay for the twins' educational expenses directly to their schools, provide Michael with quarterly distributions for living expenses, and maintain an emergency fund for medical or other legitimate crises. All distributions would require my written approval, and the trust would continue under these terms until I chose to modify them. The beauty of this structure, Marcus continued, is that it provides both protection and flexibility. You maintain complete control while ensuring the assets remain beyond the reach of predatory family members, creditors, or legal challenges. The wire transfer from Harold's trust account took 30 minutes to process. I watched $2.3 million disappear from the U.S. financial system and reappear in a Cayman Islands trust account, protected by some of the strongest privacy laws in the world. The feeling was indescribable, part relief, part satisfaction, and part anticipation for Ashley's reaction when she discovered what I'd done. Marcus provided me with account statements, trust documents, and a detailed explanation of how to manage distributions going forward. Everything was stored in a secure online portal accessible only through multiple layers of authentication. One final detail, Marcus said as we concluded our business. You should know that under Cayman law, this trust structure is essentially unbreakable. Even if someone successfully challenged your mental competency in U.S. courts, they couldn't force repatriation of assets from a properly established Cayman trust. You've created an impenetrable financial fortress. That afternoon, I celebrated my victory with a snorkeling excursion to Stingray City. Swimming with gentle rays in crystal-clear water felt symbolic. I was moving freely in an environment where my predators couldn't follow. The tropical fish, the coral formations, the weightless sensation of floating in warm Caribbean water, all reinforced my sense of liberation from Ashley's toxic influence. My phone had been buzzing with messages throughout the day, but I'd ignored them while conducting business. Now, floating peacefully in the ocean, I finally checked my notifications. Mike and ain't you? 3 missed calls from Ashley. 2 from Michael. A text message from Ashley that read, Margaret, Michael and I are concerned about your trip. Please call when you get this message. They were concerned about my trip. More likely, Ashley was growing anxious about her timeline. She'd probably hoped to have me declared incompetent and gain control of the trust before I could interfere with her plans. My sudden departure for offshore financial meetings had clearly accelerated her panic. I decided to have a little fun with the situation. From my beach chair, with a fruity drink in hand and the Caribbean sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I composed a text message to both Michael and Ashley. Having a wonderful time in paradise. Met with some fascinating financial advisors today. Amazing what options become available when you have substantial assets to protect. Feeling very confident about the future. See you soon. I attached a photo of myself raising a toast to the sunset, making sure the luxury resort setting was clearly visible in the background. Ashley's response came within minutes. Glad you're enjoying yourself. When do you return? We should definitely discuss these financial meetings. Michael's message was more direct. Mom, what kind of financial advisors? Ashley thinks we should all meet together to review any changes you're considering. Of course, Ashley wanted to meet. She was probably spending her evening frantically researching offshore financial structures, trying to understand what I might have done and how it could affect her access to the inheritance. I replied to both messages. Flying home tomorrow evening. Looking forward to sharing my new perspectives on asset protection and family financial security. Let them wonder about that for 24 hours. The flight home gave me time to plan my next moves. Ashley would undoubtedly pressure Michael to demand details about my offshore activities, probably framing her concern in terms of protecting me from financial exploitation. She might even suggest that my sudden international financial dealings were evidence of declining judgment. But I had comprehensive documentation of every decision, medical evaluations confirming my competency, and video evidence of Ashley's systematic medication tampering. When the confrontation came, and it would come soon, I would be ready with overwhelming evidence of her criminal behavior. More importantly, the inheritance was now beyond her reach forever. Ashley could spend years trying to gain control of assets that no longer existed in any jurisdiction where she could access them. Her entire scheme had been built on the assumption that Harold's trust remained vulnerable to U.S. legal challenges. That assumption was now catastrophically wrong. As the plane descended into JFK Airport, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I'd outmaneuvered someone who'd tried to poison me, protected my son's inheritance from theft, and positioned myself to expose Ashley's criminal behavior on my own terms. The war wasn't over yet, but I'd just won the most important battle. Ashley had made the classic mistake of underestimating her opponent while overplaying her hand. She'd revealed her intentions too early, moved too aggressively, and failed to account for her target's professional expertise in protecting assets from exactly her type of predatory behavior. My taxi ride home from the airport took me through familiar neighborhoods now tinged with new significance. This was no longer just my hometown. It was the battlefield where I would complete Ashley's destruction while protecting my family from her toxic influence. Winston, the taxi driver, had been right. Business and pleasure could definitely mix. I'd conducted the most important business of my life while enjoying every moment of Ashley's impending defeat. The Caribbean sunshine had indeed felt wonderful, but not nearly as wonderful as the knowledge that Ashley's scheme had just collapsed completely, and she didn't even know it yet. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning she'd earned through months of calculated cruelty. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully in my own bed, protected by offshore trusts and international privacy laws that Ashley couldn't penetrate, challenge, or even fully understand. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey had just discovered she had teeth. The first sign that Ashley was panicking came at 6:47 a.m. the morning after my return. My phone rang while I was still in bed, jet lag making the early hour feel even more brutal. "Margaret, thank goodness you're back safely." Ashley's voice carried an artificial brightness that didn't mask her underlying tension. "Michael and I were hoping we could come over this morning to hear about your trip." This morning, less than 12 hours after my return. Ashley wasn't even pretending this was a social visit anymore. "How thoughtful," I replied, deliberately keeping my voice sleepy and confused. "Though I'm still quite tired from traveling. Perhaps later in the week?" "Actually, we're both free today, and Michael took the morning off work specifically to see you. We're really excited to hear about these financial advisors you mentioned." Of course, Michael had taken time off work. Ashley had probably kept him awake all night, feeding him fears about my offshore activities and my declining judgment. She was moving fast now, probably sensing that her window of opportunity was closing. "Well, if you insist," I said with a theatrical sigh. "Give me a couple of hours to get organized. Say 10 o'clock? Perfect. We'll bring coffee and pastries from that bakery you like." After Ashley hung up, I smiled and stretched luxuriously in my bed. She was offering bribes now, coffee and pastries to soften me up before the interrogation. The desperation was becoming obvious. Perza, I spent the next 3 hours preparing for what would likely be our final confrontation. First, I organized all my documentation, the offshore trust papers, my cognitive evaluation results, Dr. Reeves's medical reports, and most importantly, the security camera footage of Ashley systematically stealing my medication. Everything went into a manila folder marked estate planning that I left conspicuously on my kitchen table. Next, I called David Chen to give him a heads up about the likely conversation. "Margaret, I'm glad you're being proactive about this. Ashley will probably try to convince Michael that you've been financially exploited or that your judgment is compromised. Having comprehensive documentation ready is smart." "Should I mention the medication tampering directly?" I asked. "Not unless they force the issue. Let them show their hand first. If Ashley becomes aggressive or threatens legal action, that's when you reveal what you know about her criminal behavior." At exactly 10 o'clock, Michael's Honda pulled into my driveway. Through my living room window, I watched Ashley emerge from the passenger seat carrying a bag from Westchester's most expensive bakery, more evidence that she was trying to butter me up before the attack. Michael looked genuinely concerned as he hugged me. "Hello, his engineer's mind probably struggling to understand why his reliable mother had suddenly started making mysterious international financial decisions. Ashley's performance was flawless. Warm smile, affectionate embrace, perfectly pitched enthusiasm about my adventure. "You look wonderful, Margaret," she gushed as we settled in my living room. "The Caribbean obviously agreed with you." "It was exactly what I needed," I replied, accepting the coffee she'd brought. "Amazing how much clearer everything becomes when you're away from daily stresses." Michael leaned forward with the earnest expression he'd worn since childhood when trying to understand adult complexities. "Mom, Ashley and I have been talking about your trip, and we're a little concerned about these financial advisors you mentioned. We just want to make sure you weren't approached by anyone who might try to take advantage." There it was, the opening Ashley had orchestrated. Frame me as a potential victim of financial exploitation, establish themselves as protective family members, then demand access to details about my offshore activities. "Take advantage?" I repeated, letting a note of confusion creep into my voice. "Oh my, I hadn't considered that possibility." Ashley pounced immediately. "These offshore financial schemes are notorious for targeting elderly investors, Margaret. They promise special returns or tax advantages, but they're often just ways to steal people's money." Elderly investors. Ashley was already positioning me as a vulnerable target, rather than a sophisticated financial decision-maker. "Well, I certainly wouldn't want to be taken advantage of," I said, playing along with her narrative. "Perhaps you could help me understand what to watch out for." For the next 20 minutes, Ashley delivered what amounted to a lecture on financial fraud targeting seniors. She was good, citing real statistics, referencing actual scams, building a case that my offshore activities were inherently suspicious. Michael nodded along, clearly convinced that his wife was protecting his naive mother from sophisticated criminals. Throughout her presentation, Ashley kept steering the conversation toward specific details about my offshore meetings. How much money had I discussed moving? What kind of returns had been promised? Had I signed any documents or made any commitments? I deflected each question with the confused rambling of someone who might have been overwhelmed by complex financial discussions. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, designed to make Ashley overconfident about her ability to manipulate me. "You know, you're absolutely right to be concerned," I finally said, reaching for the manila folder on my kitchen table. "Let me show you some of the paperwork they gave me. Maybe you can help me figure out if I made any mistakes." Ashley's eyes lit up as I brought the folder back to the living room. This was what she'd been angling for: access to the documentation that would reveal exactly what I'd done with the trust assets. I opened the folder deliberately, making sure they could see the offshore trust documents on top. Ashley leaned forward eagerly while Michael looked on with protective concern. "These are quite complex," I said, pretending to fumble through the pages. "Something about asset protection and beneficiary designations. I'm afraid I don't understand all the legal terminology." Ashley practically lunged for the documents. "May I take a look?" "I deal with pharmaceutical companies' international divisions, so I'm familiar with offshore business structures." She was lying, of course. Pharmaceutical sales involved no offshore expertise, but Ashley needed a pretext for understanding documents that should have been beyond her knowledge. I handed over the trust papers and watched Ashley's face as she read. The initial predatory excitement gave way to confusion, then growing alarm as she realized what the documents actually meant. "Margaret," she said carefully, "this appears to be a trust establishment, not an investment proposal. According to this paperwork, you've actually transferred assets to an offshore trust structure. Is that bad?" I asked innocently. "The attorney said it would protect the money from taxes and legal problems." Ashley's facade was beginning to crack. "How much money are we talking about, Margaret?" "Oh, I'm not supposed to discuss specific amounts," I replied with theatrical vagueness. "Confidentiality requirements, you understand." Michael was looking increasingly worried. "Mom, maybe we should all meet with your regular financial advisor to review this together. This seems like a very big decision to make without family input." "Family input," I repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose that would have been wise, though I did think carefully about protecting the family's interests." Ashley couldn't contain herself any longer. "Margaret, if you've moved significant assets offshore without proper legal review, you could have jeopardized the entire estate. Michael's inheritance. the girls' college funds. Everything could be at risk. There it was. Ashley's real concern wasn't my financial welfare, but her access to Michael's inheritance. She'd just revealed that she knew about the trust fund and considered it within her sphere of influence. Michael's inheritance? I asked with perfectly feigned surprise. Oh my, I hadn't thought about how this might affect that. Should I be worried? Michael looked stricken. Mom, what inheritance? You've never mentioned any specific inheritance before. I felt a moment of genuine sadness for my son. Ashley had clearly been discussing his future inheritance with him, building expectations and making plans, while I'd been deliberately vague about the details to prevent exactly this kind of manipulation. Well, your father did set aside some money for your future, I admitted. I've been managing it as a trustee, waiting for the right time to discuss the details. How much money? Ashley demanded, abandoning all pretense of polite concern. The mask was completely off now. This wasn't a worried daughter-in-law protecting her mother-in-law from financial fraud. This was a predator demanding access to assets she'd been scheming to control. Ashley, I said quietly, that's a very interesting question. It suggests you're already aware of specific assets and have been making plans based on them. She realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. Michael was staring at his wife with a dawning understanding. Ashley, how do you know about Dad's inheritance planning? Mom never gave us specific amounts. Ashley scrambled to recover. I just assumed there would be something, Michael. Most people your father's age have life insurance and retirement accounts. But the damage was done. Michael's engineer mind was working through the implications, realizing that Ashley had knowledge she shouldn't possess, and was far more invested in his inheritance than appropriate. This was the perfect moment to shift from defense to offense. Actually, I said, standing to retrieve my laptop from the study. Since we're discussing family financial planning, there's something else you should both see. I returned with my computer and pulled up the security camera footage. I've been dealing with some medication issues lately, and I installed cameras to help identify the problem. Ashley went completely still as I positioned the laptop so both she and Michael could see the screen. This footage is from last Thursday morning, I said, clicking play. The video showed Ashley entering my kitchen with her key, going directly to my medication cabinet, and systematically removing pills from multiple bottles. Her movements were efficient, practiced, unrushed, the behavior of someone who'd done this many times before. Michael watched in stunned silence as his wife counted out my blood pressure medication and slipped the pills into a small plastic bag. The timestamp showed this had occurred while I was at my bridge club, making Ashley's actions clearly premeditated and deliberate. I have similar footage from 6 other occasions over the past month, I said calmly. Plus medical records showing dangerous blood pressure spikes that correlate directly with Ashley's visits to my house. Ashley had gone completely white. Michael was staring at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before. Horrified disbelief mixed with dawning understanding of what he was witnessing. Ashley, Michael said slowly, what is this? Why are you taking Mom's medication? Ashley's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. I was worried about her taking too many pills. I thought she might be getting confused about dosages. So you decided to steal my medication without telling me or my doctor? I asked. Ashley, reducing blood pressure medication without medical supervision can cause strokes or heart attacks. You weren't protecting me. You were systematically endangering my health. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael was staring at Ashley like he'd never seen her before, while Ashley realized that her entire scheme had not only failed but been exposed with documentary evidence. I think, I said quietly, it's time we had a completely honest conversation about what's really been happening in this family. The silence in my living room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Ashley sat frozen on my couch, her face cycling through expressions of panic, calculation, and desperate searching for an explanation that might salvage her position. Michael stared at the laptop screen where the security footage had ended, his engineering mind clearly struggling to process the evidence of his wife's systematic criminal behavior. I closed the laptop and set it aside, then took my seat across from them with the calm authority of someone who held all the cards. "Ashley," I said quietly, "I think Michael deserves to understand exactly what you've been doing and why." Ashley's first instinct was to continue lying. "Margaret, I know this looks bad, but I was genuinely concerned about your medication management. I was going to talk to Michael about getting you one of those automatic pill dispensers." The weakness of her excuse was almost insulting. "By stealing my blood pressure medication? Ashley, I have medical records showing dangerous hypertensive episodes that correspond exactly with your visits. You weren't managing my medication, you were sabotaging it." Michael found his voice, though it came out strangled and confused. "Ashley, this doesn't make any sense. If you were worried about Mom's pills, why didn't you just talk to me? Why would you take them secretly?" Ashley's eyes darted between us, searching for an angle that might work. I could almost see her calculating different approaches: denial, deflection, playing the victim herself. But the security footage was irrefutable, and she was intelligent enough to realize that her position was completely compromised. "I need to know something," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger as the initial shock wore off. "How did you know about Dad's inheritance fund? Mom never told us specific details, but you asked about amounts like you already knew money existed." This was the question that would unravel everything, and Ashley knew it. She'd been trapped by her own greed and overconfidence, revealing knowledge she shouldn't possess and asking questions that exposed her true motivations. "Michael," I said gently, "before Ashley answers that, you should understand the full scope of what your father left for your family." I retrieved the original trust documents from my folder. Not the offshore papers, but Harold's original estate planning. Michael read through them slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to amazement as he realized the magnitude of what his father had provided. $2.3 million, he said finally, looking up at me with wonder. "Dad left me $2.3 million. He left it for your family's future," I corrected. "College funds for Sophia and Grace, security for your retirement, protection against unexpected hardships. I've been managing it as trustee, waiting for the right time to begin distributions." Michael's attention shifted back to Ashley, his expression hardening. "How did you know about this money?" Ashley realized she was cornered, but she tried one more desperate deflection. "I found some paperwork in our filing cabinet months ago. Documents with your mother's name and large dollar amounts. I was worried someone might be taking advantage of her, so I started paying attention to her financial activities." The lie was smooth, but I was ready for it. "What paperwork?" I asked. "Michael, have you ever given Ashley any estate documents to file?" Michael shook his head slowly. "No, Mom, I don't have any estate documents. You always said you'd discuss the details when the time was right." Ashley's fabrication collapsed immediately. She'd claimed to find documents that didn't exist in a place where they'd never been stored. The desperation was making her sloppy. "Ashley," I continued relentlessly, "the only way you could have known about the trust fund is if you've been accessing my personal papers without permission. Just like you've been accessing my medication without permission." The pieces were falling into place for Michael. I could see him making connections, remembering incidents that now took on new significance in light of Ashley's systematic deception. "The spare key," Michael said suddenly. "You asked me to get a spare key to Mom's house after Dad died. You said it was for emergencies, but you've been using it to go through her things." Ashley's composure finally cracked completely. "Michael, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Your mother is getting older, making questionable financial decisions, and I was worried about our family's security." "Our family's security?" Michael's voice rose with anger. "You've been poisoning my mother and going through her private papers. How is that protecting our family?" "I wasn't poisoning anyone," Ashley snapped, her mask finally slipping entirely. "I was documenting her medication compliance issues to establish a pattern of declining competency. The money your father left should be managed by someone who understands financial planning, not by a 72-year-old woman who might develop dementia or make impulsive decisions." The room went dead silent. Ashley had just confessed to everything: the systematic medication tampering, the invasion of my privacy, and her ultimate goal of having me declared incompetent so she could control the inheritance. Michael stared at his wife with horror. You were trying to make Mom look incompetent? You were deliberately making her sick? I was protecting our future, Ashley shouted, abandoning all pretense now. Do you know what $2.3 million could do for our family? The girls' educations, our retirement, the life we could build? Instead, it's sitting there while your mother gardens and plays bridge, and eventually it'll be eaten up by nursing home costs or medical bills. The naked greed in her voice was stunning. She wasn't even trying to frame this as concern for my welfare anymore. This was pure avarice, revealed in all its ugly clarity. So you decided to steal it, I said calmly, by systematically damaging my health, documenting my supposed decline, and having me declared incompetent. I decided to protect it, Ashley corrected, still trying to justify her actions. From poor decision-making, from potential scammers, from the inevitable decline that comes with aging. Michael stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Ashley, do you even hear yourself? You've been committing crimes against my mother. Elder abuse, theft, endangerment, God knows what else. Crimes? Ashley laughed bitterly. Michael, I'm a pharmaceutical sales representative. I understand medication interactions and dosing better than most people. I never put your mother in any real danger. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Ashley had just claimed professional expertise in medication management while simultaneously admitting to tampering with my prescriptions. She'd handed me the perfect opening to destroy her remaining credibility. Ashley, I said, reaching for my phone, since you're claiming professional expertise in managing my medication, I think Dr. Reeves would be very interested in your opinions. Ashley went pale as I dialed my doctor's office. What are you doing? I'm calling my physician to discuss the medication tampering I've discovered. As you said, you're a pharmaceutical professional, so I'm sure you'll want to explain your medical rationale for reducing my blood pressure medication without consulting my doctor. Margaret, wait. But I was already speaking to Dr. Reeves's nurse, explaining that I had video evidence of someone tampering with my medication and needed to discuss the medical implications immediately. The nurse put me through to Dr. Reeves, who listened grimly as I described the situation. Mrs. Sinclair, what you're describing constitutes serious medical endangerment. Reducing blood pressure medication without supervision can cause strokes, heart attacks, or kidney damage. If you have evidence of who's been doing this, you need to contact the police immediately. I put the call on speaker so Ashley and Michael could hear Dr. Reeves's assessment. Doctor, I said, the person responsible claims to be knowledgeable about medication management due to their work in pharmaceutical sales. They say they never put me in real danger. Dr. Reeves' response was swift and unequivocal. No pharmaceutical sales representative has the training or authority to adjust patient medication. What you've described is criminal behavior that could have killed you. Whoever did this needs to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Ashley was shaking now, finally understanding that her actions had crossed lines she couldn't uncross. Michael looked like he might be sick. After ending the call, I turned back to Ashley with cold satisfaction. Dr. Reeves seems to disagree with your assessment of the danger you created. Margaret, please, Ashley said, her voice breaking. I made mistakes, but I was trying to help. Surely we can work this out within the family. Work this out? Michael exploded. Ashley, you've been systematically poisoning my mother for months. You've been stealing from her, lying to me, and God knows what else. How exactly do we work this out? Ashley turned to Michael with desperate pleading. Michael, think about our daughters. If this becomes public, if there are criminal charges, what happens to Sophia and Grace? They need stable parents, not a scandal that destroys our family. She was trying to use the children as leverage, making Michael choose between justice for me and protection for his daughters. It was a manipulative tactic that revealed just how far Ashley would go to avoid consequences for her actions. But I had one more revelation that would end this manipulation forever. Actually, Ashley, I said quietly, the girls' futures are already protected. I established education trusts for both Sophia and Grace during my trip to the Cayman Islands. Their college funds are secure, regardless of what happens between us. Michael looked at me in amazement. You did what? I moved your inheritance to an offshore trust structure that protects it from any future legal challenges or marital disputes. Sophia and Grace each have dedicated education funds that neither you nor Ashley can access or redirect. The trust will pay their tuition directly to any accredited university they choose to attend. Ashley's face went through a series of expressions as she processed this information. You moved the money offshore? All of it? Every penny, I confirmed. It's now held in a Cayman Islands trust that's completely beyond the reach of U.S. courts. Even if you'd succeeded in having me declared incompetent, you'd never have been able to access those assets. The full scope of Ashley's failure was finally hitting her. Not only had her scheme been exposed, but the money she'd been scheming for had been moved beyond her reach forever. She'd committed serious crimes for absolutely nothing. You can't do that, Ashley shouted. That money belongs to Michael. You're stealing from your own son. Actually, I replied calmly, as a trustee, I have complete discretion over how and when to distribute those assets. Harold specifically structured it that way to protect Michael from poor financial decisions, including those made by people who might influence him. Michael was staring at me with something approaching awe. Mom, you moved over $2 million offshore to protect it from Ashley? I moved it offshore to protect it from anyone who might try to steal it through fraud, manipulation, or abuse, I clarified. The fact that Ashley falls into that category is her own doing. Ashley realized that her situation was completely hopeless. The money was gone, her crimes were documented, and her marriage was collapsing in real time. In desperation, she tried one final threat. If you pursue this, Margaret, I'll tell everyone you're a vindictive old woman who hid money offshore to spite your family. I'll make sure the whole community knows what kind of person you really are. I smiled at her pathetic attempt at intimidation. Ashley, I said, I have video evidence of you systematically stealing my medication, medical records proving you endangered my health, and a confession, recorded on my phone, where you admitted to trying to have me declared incompetent to steal my son's inheritance. Please, by all means, tell the community your version of events. I'm sure they'll find it fascinating. The fight went out of Ashley completely. She slumped back on the couch, finally understanding that she'd lost everything and had no moves left to make. Michael stood in the center of my living room, looking lost and devastated. His wife had betrayed not just me but their entire family, and now he had to figure out how to move forward from this wreckage. Mom, he said quietly, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you. Michael, I replied gently, you couldn't have known. Ashley is very good at manipulation. But now that we all know the truth, we can decide how to move forward. The reckoning was complete. Ashley's scheme had failed spectacularly, the inheritance was protected, and my health was safe. But the hardest part was still ahead, watching my son navigate the destruction of his marriage and helping him rebuild his life after such a profound betrayal. The war was over, and I had won, but victory felt bittersweet when it came at the cost of my family's happiness, even if that cost had been imposed by Ashley's greed rather than my actions. Now came the most difficult phase: justice, consequences, and healing. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of legal consultations, police interviews, and difficult family conversations. Michael had left my house that devastating afternoon in stunned silence, taking Ashley with him but making it clear that their marriage was effectively over. The look in his eyes as he'd guided his wife to the car was one I'd never seen before. A mixture of betrayal, disgust, and profound disappointment that cut deeper than any anger could have. I spent that first evening calling David Chen to update him on the confrontation and its aftermath. Margaret, I have to say, the way you handled that was masterful, he said after I'd recounted the entire scene. Getting Ashley to confess on a recorded phone call while you had Dr. Reeves on speaker was brilliant. But now comes the hard part, deciding how far to pursue legal action. The question had been weighing on me since Michael and Ashley left. Did I want to press criminal charges against my daughter-in-law? The evidence was overwhelming. Video surveillance, medical records, recorded confessions, and witness testimony from Dr. Reeves. Ashley could face serious felony charges for elder abuse, endangerment, and attempted fraud. What are my options, I asked. Complete prosecution. We turn everything over to the district attorney and let them pursue maximum charges. Partial prosecution. We file charges but negotiate for lesser offenses in exchange for cooperation. Or private resolution. We use the threat of prosecution to force specific behaviors and agreements. Each option carried different implications for Michael and the twins. Criminal charges would become public record, potentially affecting Michael's career and the girls' social lives. But allowing Ashley to escape consequences entirely would send the wrong message about the seriousness of her crimes. I need to talk with Michael first, I decided. This affects his children too, and while I won't let that stop me from seeking justice, I want to understand the full impact before I decide how to proceed. The conversation with Michael came the next morning. He appeared at my door looking like he hadn't slept, his usually neat appearance disheveled and his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. Mom, can we talk? I mean, really talk about everything that's happened? I made coffee, and we sat in my kitchen, the same room where Ashley had systematically stolen my medication for months. Michael stared at the cabinet where I kept my pills, probably imagining his wife's calculated movements as she'd endangered my health for her own financial gain. I keep thinking about signs I should have seen, he said quietly. Ashley asking so many questions about your health, suggesting you might need help managing your affairs, encouraging me to get more involved in your finances. I thought she was being caring, but she was setting up her takeover plan. Michael, manipulative people are experts at making their behavior seem reasonable, I assured him. Ashley presented herself as a concerned daughter-in-law protecting the family's interests. You couldn't have known her real motivations. But I should have questioned why she was so interested in your inheritance, he insisted. Normal people don't spend months planning how to access money that isn't theirs. The guilt in his voice broke my heart. Michael was a good man who'd been deceived by someone he trusted completely. Ashley had exploited his love for his family and his respect for his wife to nearly destroy everything Harold had worked to build. Michael, we need to discuss what happens next, I said gently. I have enough evidence to have Ashley prosecuted for multiple felonies. But I want to understand how that would affect you and the girls before I make any decisions. Michael was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. What kind of charges are we talking about? Elder abuse, endangerment, attempted fraud, theft. David Chen thinks she could face 5 to 10 years in prison if convicted on all counts. The number hit Michael like a physical blow. 10 years? Mom, that would destroy Sophia and Grace. They'd grow up with their mother in prison, dealing with the stigma, the questions from other kids. I'd been expecting this reaction, and I understood his concern. The twins were innocent victims of their mother's greed, and they didn't deserve to suffer for Ashley's crimes. But allowing Ashley to escape justice entirely felt wrong too. There might be alternatives, I suggested. David mentioned the possibility of negotiated settlements that would avoid public prosecution while still holding Ashley accountable. What kind of alternatives? I pulled out the notes I'd made during my conversation with David. Ashley could agree to a divorce with specific custody arrangements, financial restitution for my medical expenses and emotional distress, a restraining order preventing any contact with me, and professional counseling to address her behavior patterns. Michael considered this carefully. She'd avoid prison, but she'd lose everything else? She'd lose access to your family's financial future, which was her primary goal. The offshore trust protects your inheritance regardless, but a negotiated settlement would ensure she can never attempt something like this again. And if she refuses the settlement, then we pursue full prosecution and let a jury decide her fate. Michael nodded slowly, understanding that I was offering Ashley a choice: accept consequences privately or face them publicly in criminal court. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. Do you think Ashley ever loved me, or was this always about the money? The question revealed the deepest wound Ashley had inflicted, not just the betrayal of trust, but the fundamental doubt about whether their entire relationship had been built on deception. Michael, I think Ashley did love you, in her own way, but I also think her love was conditional on the lifestyle and security you could provide. When she learned about your father's inheritance, it changed how she saw your marriage from partnership to financial opportunity. So our whole life together was a lie? Your feelings were real, I assured him. Your commitment to your family was real. The fact that Ashley exploited those feelings doesn't diminish their value or make you foolish for having them. We spent the rest of the morning discussing practical next steps. Michael would confront Ashley with the settlement options I'd outlined, making it clear that her choice was between private accountability and public prosecution. He would also begin divorce proceedings regardless of her decision, as the trust between them had been irreparably broken. What about the girls? Michael asked as our conversation wound down. How do I explain why their family is falling apart? Age-appropriately and honestly, I suggested. They don't need details about the medication tampering or financial schemes, but they deserve to understand that their mother made choices that hurt people they love. That afternoon, Michael returned home to have the most difficult conversation of his marriage. I spent the time organizing my evidence files and preparing for whatever response Ashley might choose. Her answer came sooner than expected. At 8 p.m., my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Margaret, it's Ashley. Michael told me about your proposal. Her voice carried none of the artificial warmth I'd grown accustomed to. This was Ashley stripped of all pretense, cold, calculating, and angry at being outmaneuvered. I'm willing to discuss terms, she continued, but I have some conditions of my own. I'm listening. First, I want to guarantee that you'll never discuss this situation with anyone outside the immediate family. No criminal charges, no civil lawsuits, no gossip that could affect my professional reputation. The audacity was breathtaking. Ashley had committed serious crimes against me, and now she was trying to dictate the terms of her own consequences. Second, I want assurance that the girls will have access to their college funds without interference from you. Whatever you've set up offshore, they shouldn't be punished for my mistakes. And third, I want a written agreement that Michael won't seek full custody. I made errors in judgment, but I'm still their mother, and they need stability. I listened to her demands with growing amazement. Ashley seemed to believe she was negotiating from a position of strength rather than complete defeat. She'd apparently failed to grasp that she had no leverage whatsoever. Ashley, I said calmly, let me clarify something for you. You're not in a position to make demands. You committed felonies against me that are documented with video evidence and medical records. The only reason I'm offering a private settlement is to protect Michael and the girls from the public scandal of your prosecution. You need this settlement too, Ashley countered. If this goes to court, everyone will know that you moved millions of dollars offshore to spite your family. People will think you're a vindictive old woman who destroyed her son's marriage over money. I almost laughed at her attempt to threaten me with public opinion. Ashley, I have video of you stealing my medication and audio of you confessing to attempted fraud. I'm not concerned about how people might interpret my protective actions when your criminal behavior is exposed. The silence that followed told me Ashley was finally beginning to understand her true position. She'd been operating under the assumption that mutual assured destruction would force me to accept her terms, but she'd miscalculated the strength of my evidence and my willingness to endure public scrutiny. What exactly are you offering? She asked finally, her voice smaller and more defeated. I outlined the settlement terms David and I had developed. Immediate divorce with limited custody arrangements, restraining order preventing contact with me, financial restitution for my medical expenses and legal costs, mandatory counseling for her behavioral issues, and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would protect both sides from public discussion of the details. If you accept these terms within 48 hours, the matter stays private, I concluded. If you refuse or attempt to negotiate, I turn everything over to the district attorney and let criminal prosecution proceed. And the girls' college funds are completely protected regardless of your decision. The education trusts I established are irrevocable and beyond anyone's ability to interfere with, including mine. Ashley was quiet for nearly a minute, probably calculating whether she had any other options. Finally, she spoke with the bitter resignation of someone who'd played a high-stakes game and lost everything. I'll need to review the written terms with my own attorney. Of course. David Chen will have the settlement documents ready tomorrow morning. You have until Friday at 5 p.m. to decide. After ending the call, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction at Ashley's defeat, certainly, but also sadness for the family disruption her greed had caused. Michael would have to rebuild his life as a single father, the twins would grow up in a broken home, and years of family relationships had been permanently damaged. But justice was being served, even if it came at a cost. Ashley would face consequences for her actions, my health and finances were protected, and Michael's inheritance remained secure for his and his daughter's futures. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sophia and Grace appeared at my door with Michael, both girls carrying handmade cards and looking uncertain about whether they were in trouble. "Grandma Margaret," Sophia said hesitantly, "Daddy said Mommy made some bad choices, and we wanted to make sure you're okay." I knelt down to their level, looking into faces that reminded me so much of Harold and Michael at that age. These innocent children were casualties of their mother's greed, and they deserved better than the chaos Ashley had created. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured them, "and no matter what happens with your parents, you'll always be my granddaughters and I'll always love you." Grace, the quieter twin, spoke up with 8-year-old directness. "Are you mad at Mommy?" The question went straight to the heart of everything. Was I mad at Ashley? Disappointed? Betrayed? All of those things, certainly, but what I felt most strongly was determination to protect these girls from suffering for their mother's crimes. "I'm sad that Mommy made choices that hurt people," I said carefully, "but I'm not mad at you, and I want to make sure you have everything you need to grow up happy and successful." Michael squeezed my shoulder gratefully. Whatever happened with Ashley, we would make sure Sophia and Grace emerged from this crisis, with their futures intact and their family bonds preserved. The settlement documents arrived that afternoon, comprehensive and unforgiving in their terms. Ashley had 36 hours to decide between private accountability and public prosecution. Either way, the inheritance was safe, my health was protected, and justice would be served. Ashley's scheme had failed completely, and now she would face the consequences of targeting the wrong family with the wrong plan. The countdown to her decision had begun. Friday afternoon arrived with the crisp clarity of early autumn, leaves beginning their transformation outside my kitchen window as I waited for Ashley's final decision. The settlement documents had been delivered to her attorney Wednesday morning, giving her exactly 48 hours to choose between private accountability and public prosecution. David Chen sat across from me at my dining room table, his laptop open and phone ready to either file the signed agreement or contact the district attorney's office. At 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline, David's phone rang. "Margaret, it's done," he announced after a brief conversation with Ashley's attorney. "She's accepted all terms without modification. The settlement will be executed Monday morning, and this matter will be resolved privately." I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. Ashley had chosen the path that would protect Michael and the girls from public scandal, while still facing meaningful consequences for her crimes. Justice would be served even if it came wrapped in legal agreements rather than criminal convictions. "What happens next?" I asked. "Ashley signs the settlement, agrees to immediate divorce proceedings with the custody arrangements you specified, and begins the counseling program we outlined. She'll also transfer funds to cover your medical expenses and legal costs. Most importantly, the restraining order goes into effect immediately. She cannot contact you or come within 500 feet of your property." The practical details felt surreal after months of living under the threat of Ashley's manipulation. I would never again have to worry about finding my medication tampered with or discovering that someone had been in my house without permission. The psychological relief was enormous. That evening, Michael came over for dinner with Sophia and Grace. The girls seemed more relaxed than they'd been in weeks, probably sensing that the adult tension that had been pervading their household was finally resolving. Michael looked exhausted but determined, like someone who'd made difficult decisions and was ready to move forward. "The girls have something they want to ask you," Michael said as we cleared the dinner dishes. Sophia, always the more outspoken twin, took the lead. "Grandma Margaret, Daddy said we can ask you about our college money. Is it true you set up special accounts just for us?" I sat down with them at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd once sorted pills while Ashley plotted against me. Now it would become the place where I discussed educational opportunities with my granddaughters. "It's absolutely true," I confirmed. Your grandfather Harold and I always plan to help with your education, and I've made sure that money is protected and waiting for you when you're ready for college. Grace's eyes widened. Any college we want? Any accredited university that accepts you, I said with a smile. The accounts will pay tuition, room and board, books, and reasonable living expenses for 4 years of undergraduate education each. The twins looked at each other with the kind of excited whisper conference that 8-year-olds have when processing big news. Michael watched them with a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that their futures were secure, sadness that their mother's greed had nearly jeopardized everything. There's something else, I continued. I've also established accounts for graduate school if either of you chooses to pursue advanced degrees. Medical school, law school, PhD programs, whatever path your interests take you. Michael's eyes filled with tears. Mom, that's incredibly generous. Dad would be so proud of what you've accomplished. Your father planned for this family's future, I replied. I just made sure his plans couldn't be derailed by someone with different priorities. After the girls went to play in the living room, Michael and I talked about the practical aspects of moving forward. He'd already found a family law attorney to handle the divorce proceedings, and Ashley had agreed to move out of their house within 2 weeks. The custody arrangement would give Ashley every other weekend with the girls, supervised initially and expanding gradually if she completed her counseling program successfully. Are you okay with those custody terms? I asked. You could have pushed for full custody given what she did. Michael considered the question carefully. Despite everything Ashley has done, she is their mother. The girls love her. And taking that relationship away completely would hurt them more than it would punish her. But the supervision requirement ensures they're safe, and the counseling mandate means Ashley has to address her behavior patterns. His maturity and compassion impressed me. Ashley had betrayed him in the most fundamental ways possible, yet he was still prioritizing his daughter's emotional well-being over his own desire for revenge. What about you? I asked. How are you handling all of this? Some days are better than others, he admitted. I keep wondering if I ever really knew Ashley at all. Looking back, there were signs of her materialism, her focus on status and appearance. But I never imagined she was capable of what she did to you. Michael, you fell in love with the person Ashley presented herself to be. The fact that she was hiding her true nature doesn't reflect poorly on your judgment. It reflects poorly on her character. We spent the evening playing board games with the twins, establishing new family traditions that didn't include Ashley's presence. For the first time in months, my house felt peaceful rather than threatened, filled with genuine laughter rather than the artificial cheerfulness Ashley had always projected. The following Monday brought the formal execution of the settlement agreement. David Chen handled most of the legal logistics, but I insisted on being present when Ashley signed the documents. I wanted to see her face when she officially acknowledged the consequences of her actions. Ashley arrived at David's office looking like a shadow of her former self. Gone was the polished pharmaceutical representative who'd once commanded every room she entered. In her place sat a woman who'd gambled everything on a scheme that had backfired completely, leaving her isolated and facing an uncertain future. She signed each document mechanically, her attorney advising her on the implications of various clauses. When she reached the restraining order paperwork, she paused and looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. Margaret, I want you to know that I never intended to seriously harm you, she said quietly. I thought I was managing a situation that could have gotten worse if left unaddressed. Even now, even after being caught and defeated, Ashley was still trying to reframe her crimes as protective actions. The narcissism was so complete that she genuinely seemed to believe her own justifications. Ashley, I replied calmly, intention doesn't change impact. You systematically endangered my health for months while planning to steal my son's inheritance. The fact that you convinced yourself these were reasonable actions doesn't make them any less criminal. She flinched at the word criminal, probably because the settlement agreement had allowed her to avoid that official designation. But we both knew what she was, regardless of how the legal system chose to categorize her behavior. I hope you use the counseling program to understand why you thought these actions were acceptable, I continued. Not for my sake, but for your daughter's sake. They deserve a mother who makes better choices. Ashley's composure cracked slightly at the mention of Sophia and Grace. Whatever her other failings, she did seem to genuinely love her children, even if that love hadn't been enough to prevent her from jeopardizing their family's stability. After the signing ceremony, I drove home with a profound sense of completion. The woman who had tried to steal my health, my competency, and my family's future had been held accountable for her actions. The inheritance was protected beyond her reach, my medical safety was guaranteed, and my family could begin healing from the damage she'd caused. But, perhaps most importantly, I had rediscovered parts of myself that I'd forgotten existed. The months of fighting Ashley's scheme had awakened the strategic thinking and fierce determination that had made me successful in my accounting career. I'd been reminded that being 72 didn't mean being helpless, and that experience and wisdom were powerful weapons against those who would exploit perceived vulnerability. 3 months later, life had settled into new rhythms that felt both familiar and refreshingly different. My weekly routines still included bridge games and book club meetings, but I'd also added volunteer work with a legal aid organization that helped elderly clients protect themselves from financial exploitation. My experience with Ashley had given me insights that proved valuable in identifying and preventing similar schemes targeting other seniors. Michael and the girls had dinner with me every Sunday, a tradition that felt more meaningful now that it was based on genuine affection rather than obligatory family maintenance. Sophia and Grace were thriving despite their parents' divorce, probably benefiting from the reduced tension in their household. They'd adjusted to the custody arrangement with the resilience that children often display when adults handle difficult situations with honesty and consistency. Ashley had completed her first month of counseling and was reportedly making progress in understanding the thought patterns that had led to her criminal behavior. Michael remained cautiously optimistic that she might eventually become a healthier co-parent, though he was proceeding carefully to protect the girls from any future manipulation attempts. The Offshore Trust had performed exactly as designed, generating steady returns while remaining completely inaccessible to anyone other than the designated beneficiaries. I'd authorized quarterly distributions to Michael for household expenses, and had already made the first payments toward the twins' private school tuition from their education funds. Most surprisingly, I'd also begun dating again. Richard Hartman, a widowed attorney I'd met through my volunteer work, had asked me to dinner several times, and I'd discovered that companionship at 72 could be every bit as rewarding as it had been in my younger years. Richard appreciated both my independence and my willingness to share new experiences, and he'd proven to be an excellent travel companion for the European river cruise we'd taken in late summer. On a crisp December morning, exactly 1 year after Ashley had first begun tampering with my medication, I sat in my kitchen sorting pills into my weekly organizer. But now the routine felt like self-care rather than survival, and the medications were working properly because no one was sabotaging my health for their own gain. My phone chimed with a text message from Sophia. "Grandma, I got an A+ on my science project about genetics. Grace says to tell you she finished reading the book you recommended. Can we come over this weekend to show you our report cards?" I smiled, remembering how different my life had been just 1 year ago. Then, I'd been an isolated widow whose own family was plotting against her, living in fear of someone who saw her as an obstacle to be eliminated. Now I was an active woman with a protected future, genuine relationships, and the satisfaction of having outmaneuvered someone who'd seriously underestimated her target. Ashley had intended to steal my competency, my health, and my family's financial security. Instead, she'd inadvertently given me back my strength, my confidence, and my determination to live fully regardless of what anyone else thought appropriate for someone my age. The message I'd sent to Michael from the Cayman Islands seemed like a lifetime ago. Your inheritance is now safely protected from those who would harm your mother. But the real inheritance I'd protected wasn't money. It was the principle that families should nurture rather than exploit each other, that trust should be earned rather than assumed, and that no one has the right to diminish another person's autonomy for their own benefit. As I prepared for my morning walk, a routine I'd resumed once Ashley was out of my life, I reflected on the lessons learned from this extraordinary year. Age doesn't equal vulnerability unless we accept that equation. Experience is a powerful weapon against those who would manipulate us. And sometimes the best way to protect the people we love is to refuse to be victimized by those who would harm them. I picked up my keys and headed for the door, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring. At 72, I'd learned that it's never too late to fight back, never too late to reclaim your power, and never too late to ensure that justice prevails over exploitation. Ashley had tried to hide my medication to steal my son's inheritance. Instead, she'd given me the greatest gift possible: the rediscovery of my own strength, and the knowledge that I was still capable of protecting the people I loved from those who would harm them. The war was over, and I had won completely. But more than that, I'd remembered who Margaret Sinclair really was, beneath the widow, the mother, and the grandmother. A formidable woman who'd spent decades solving problems and protecting assets from people exactly like Ashley. That woman was back, and she was ready for whatever came next. The spring following my victory brought unexpected opportunities that would have seemed impossible during Ashley's reign of manipulation. Dr. Patricia Reeves had referred several of her elderly patients to me after word spread about my successful defense against financial exploitation. These consultations weren't formal legal advice. I wasn't an attorney, but my decades of financial experience combined with my recent battle against elder abuse had given me unique insights into protecting vulnerable seniors. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman was my first unofficial client, an 80-year-old retired librarian whose nephew had been pressuring her to sign over power of attorney for her estate. The tactics he was using felt disturbingly familiar, questioning her memory, suggesting she was becoming too confused to manage her affairs, offering to help with increasingly complex financial decisions that she'd been handling competently for decades. "He keeps telling me I forgot conversations we never had," Mrs. Whitman explained during our coffee meeting at her assisted living facility. "Last week he insisted I'd agreed to let him refinance my house, but I never said any such thing. When I contradicted him, he suggested I should see a doctor about my memory problems." The gaslighting playbook was identical to Ashley's approach. Create confusion, document supposed incompetence, then position oneself as the concerned family member protecting the vulnerable elder from their own declining faculties. "Eleanor," I said, using the authority that came from having survived this exact battle, "has your nephew ever shown interest in your financial situation before these recent conversations?" "Never. In fact, he rarely visited until his divorce last year left him struggling financially. Now he calls twice a week and always steers the conversation toward my retirement accounts and property values." I helped Mrs. Whitman document her nephew's suspicious behavior, connect with an elder law attorney, and establish protective measures for her assets. The case never reached crisis proportions because early intervention prevented the nephew from advancing his scheme beyond the initial manipulation phase. Word of these successful interventions spread through Westchester County's senior community, and soon I was fielding requests for advice from families dealing with suspicious relatives, romantic partners who seemed more interested in bank statements than genuine affection, and supposed financial advisors targeting seniors with questionable investment schemes. My volunteer work expanded beyond individual consultations to include presentations at senior centers about recognizing and preventing financial exploitation. Standing in front of audiences of my peers, sharing the lessons learned from Ashley's systematic abuse felt like transforming a personal trauma into community protection. The key indicator, I would tell these groups, isn't necessarily what someone does, but how they respond when you question their actions. Legitimate helpers welcome scrutiny and transparency. Predators react to questions with anger, deflection, or attempts to make you feel guilty for being suspicious. One presentation at the Scarsdale Community Center led to an unexpected reunion with my former colleague Janet Morrison, whom I hadn't seen since my retirement 8 years earlier. Janet had become a certified financial planner after leaving the accounting firm where we'd worked together, and she was dealing with her own challenging family situation. "Margaret, I can't believe what you went through with Ashley," she said over lunch after my presentation. "But I have to admit, your experience has helped me recognize similar patterns with my own sister-in-law. She's been pushing my elderly mother-in-law to make some very questionable financial decisions." Janet's situation involved her husband's sister attempting to convince their 85-year-old mother to cash out her retirement accounts to invest in a, quote, guaranteed high-return scheme that bore all the hallmarks of an elaborate fraud. The sister-in-law had isolated the elderly woman from other family members, convinced her that Janet and her husband were being greedy by questioning the investment, and was applying increasing pressure for immediate action. "The deadline is always tomorrow," Janet explained. Every time we try to slow things down for proper evaluation, there's suddenly some urgent reason why the decision can't wait. I recognize the artificial urgency tactic immediately. Scammers rely on preventing their targets from seeking outside advice or taking time for rational consideration. The faster they can push someone toward a decision, the less likely that person is to recognize warning signs or consult with trusted advisors. Working with Janet, I helped her develop a strategy for protecting her mother-in-law that involved coordinating with the elderly woman's doctor, her attorney, and her bank to create safeguards against impulsive financial decisions. We also documented the sister-in-law's behavior patterns and researched the investment scheme she was promoting, which turned out to be under investigation by multiple state securities regulators. The intervention was successful, but it required months of patient work to counteract the sister-in-law's emotional manipulation and rebuild the elderly woman's confidence in her own judgment. The experience reinforced my understanding that financial exploitation often involves sophisticated psychological abuse designed to undermine the victim's sense of reality and autonomy. By summer, my informal practice had grown to the point where David Chen suggested I consider formalizing my services as a consultant specializing in elder financial protection. The idea intrigued me, offering a way to channel my experience and expertise into meaningful work that could prevent other families from enduring what Michael and I had survived. "You've developed a unique skill set," David pointed out during one of our regular lunch meetings. "Professional financial expertise, personal experience with elder abuse, and the credibility that comes from having successfully defended yourself against sophisticated manipulation. There's real demand for those services." The consulting practice launched in September, operating from a small office in White Plains that I shared with 2 other independent professionals. My first official case involved a family in Greenwich, whose patriarch was being systematically isolated and financially manipulated by his live-in caregiver. The tactics were more subtle than Ashley's direct medication tampering, but the ultimate goal was identical: gain control over an elderly person's assets by undermining their independence and decision-making capacity. Richard Hartman had become not just a romantic partner, but a valuable professional collaborator, bringing his legal expertise to cases that required both financial and legal intervention. Our relationship had deepened naturally over the months, built on mutual respect for each other's professional capabilities and shared commitment to protecting vulnerable seniors from exploitation. "You've found your calling," Richard observed one evening as we reviewed case files in my home office. "Retirement was just preparing you for this next phase of your career." He was right. The years following Harold's death had felt like an intermission, a quiet period of maintaining routines and managing grief while waiting for something meaningful to emerge. Ashley's attack had been traumatic, but surviving it had revealed capabilities and purposes I hadn't known I possessed. The holiday season brought a particularly satisfying case resolution involving a wealthy widow in Bronxville, whose stepchildren had been systematically stealing from her accounts, while convincing her that her confusion about missing money was evidence of developing dementia. Working with Richard and the woman's physician, we documented the theft, exposed the gaslighting campaign, and helped her regain control of her finances while preserving family relationships where possible. "Mrs. Sinclair," the woman said during our final meeting, "you gave me back my sanity. I was beginning to believe I really was losing my mind." That gratitude never got old. Each successful intervention felt like a small victory against the predators who targeted seniors, and a tribute to the strength Harold had always believed I possessed, but had never fully expressed until Ashley forced it to emerge. Christmas dinner that year included Michael, the twins, Richard, and his daughter, who was visiting from California. The gathering felt like a celebration not just of the holiday, but of the new family structures we'd all built from the wreckage of Ashley's betrayal. Sophia and Grace had adapted remarkably well to their parents' divorce, and their relationship with Ashley was slowly stabilizing under the terms of the custody agreement. "Grandma Margaret," Grace said as we cleared the dinner dishes, "my teacher said you help people who are in trouble with their families. Is that true?" "Sometimes," I replied carefully, aware that 8-year-olds processed information differently than adults. "I help older people protect themselves when someone is trying to take advantage of them. Like what Mommy did to you." The directness of the question caught me off guard, but I realized This was an opportunity to reinforce important lessons about trust, respect, and standing up for oneself. Yes, like what your mother did. But the important thing is that we didn't let her get away with it, and now she's getting help to make better choices in the future. Sophia joined the conversation with typical 8-year-old logic. So you're like a superhero for grandmas and grandpas? Richard chuckled from across the kitchen. That's actually a pretty accurate description. As the new year approached, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation my life had undergone in just 18 months. Ashley's scheme had been designed to steal my autonomy, my health, and my family's financial security. Instead, it had catalyzed a complete reinvention of my identity and purpose. The Offshore Trust continued performing exactly as designed, generating steady returns while remaining completely beyond Ashley's reach. Michael was thriving as a single father, the twins were excelling in school with their futures financially secured, and I had discovered a meaningful second career helping other families avoid the trauma we'd endured. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that the assumptions people make about aging and vulnerability are often more dangerous than the actual process of growing older. Ashley had targeted me because she assumed that a 72-year-old widow would be easily manipulated and overwhelmed by sophisticated financial schemes. She'd been catastrophically wrong about that assumption, and now other potential predators were learning the same lesson through my prevention work and the network of protected seniors I was helping to build. The woman who had once meekly accepted exclusion from family gatherings was now standing in front of audiences teaching others to recognize and resist manipulation. The widow who had quietly managed her grief and routine was now running a thriving consultancy and developing new relationships built on mutual respect rather than convenient assumption. Ashley had tried to steal my medication to access my son's inheritance. Instead, she'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, the rediscovery of my own power and the knowledge that my most important contributions to the world were still ahead of me, not behind me. At 73, I was just getting started. The second year of my consulting practice brought challenges that tested every skill I'd developed during my battle with Ashley. A case from Stanford involved a sophisticated romance scam targeting Martha Kellerman, a 78-year-old retired professor whose husband had died 2 years earlier. The perpetrator was a man claiming to be a widowed contractor working overseas, who had spent 6 months building an emotional relationship through daily phone calls and heartfelt letters before beginning his requests for financial assistance. He needed help with customs fees for equipment being shipped back to the States, Martha explained during our initial consultation. Then there was a medical emergency with his daughter in college. Each time he promised to repay me as soon as his business affairs were settled. Over 8 months, Martha had sent nearly $40,000 to various addresses and money transfer services, each payment accompanied by increasingly elaborate explanations for why previous promises of repayment had fallen through. The emotional manipulation was masterful. The scammer had studied Martha's loneliness, her desire to help others, and her late husband's profession as a contractor to create a fictional persona designed specifically to exploit her vulnerabilities. The worst part, Martha confided, isn't the money. It's realizing that someone studied me so carefully, learned my deepest feelings and fears, just to steal from me. It makes me question everything I thought I knew about reading people. I understood that sense of violated trust intimately. Ashley's betrayal had shaken my confidence in my ability to assess people's motivations, making me second-guess instincts that had served me well throughout my professional career. The healing process involved learning to trust myself again, while developing better tools for recognizing deception. Working with Martha required a delicate balance of emotional support and practical intervention. We reported the scam to federal authorities, worked with her bank to prevent further transfers, and developed strategies for her to safely disengage from the relationship without triggering escalated manipulation or threats from the perpetrator. The case also introduced me to Detective Sarah Rodriguez of the Westchester County Elder Abuse Unit, a specialized law enforcement division one hadn't known existed during my own crisis with Ashley. Detective Rodriguez became a valuable resource for my consulting practice, providing insights into criminal patterns and helping clients navigate the complex process of reporting financial crimes. Mrs. Sinclair, your background gives you credibility with victims that law enforcement sometimes struggles to achieve, Detective Rodriguez explained during one of our collaborative cases. When you tell someone that they can fight back against financial exploitation, they believe you because you've done it yourself. This partnership led to my involvement in training programs for law enforcement officers, social workers, and healthcare providers who encounter elder abuse in their professional roles. Speaking to these audiences required different skills than addressing senior citizens. These were professionals who needed concrete tools for recognition, documentation, and intervention rather than personal empowerment strategies. One particularly memorable training session involved a case study based on Ashley's medication tampering scheme. The nurses and physicians in attendance were shocked by the sophistication of the plot and the difficulty of detecting such systematic sabotage without surveillance technology. How many patients have we seen with unexplained medication compliance issues? One emergency room physician asked after my presentation. How many times have we attributed symptoms to normal aging or patient confusion, when someone might have been deliberately interfering with their treatment? The question haunted me because I couldn't answer it definitively. Ashley's scheme had been detected only because of my accounting background and paranoid attention to detail. How many other elderly patients were suffering from deliberately induced medical problems designed to make them appear incompetent or in need of intervention? This concern led to my collaboration with Dr. Reeves and several other geriatricians on developing screening protocols for suspected medication tampering. The guidelines we created helped healthcare providers recognize patterns that might indicate deliberate interference with patient care, documenting symptoms and timelines that could support protective interventions. The medical community's response was overwhelmingly positive, with several hospitals implementing our screening protocols and reporting suspected cases to appropriate authorities. Within 6 months, 3 additional medication tampering schemes were detected and stopped in Westchester County alone, validating our concern that Ashley's tactics were not unique. My consulting practice expanded again when corporate clients began requesting training programs for employees who worked with elderly customers. Banks, investment firms, and insurance companies were increasingly aware of their potential liability when their representatives failed to recognize signs of elder financial exploitation. These corporate training sessions focused on practical recognition skills, identifying customers who seemed confused or frightened, recognizing unusual transaction patterns, and understanding when to involve supervisors or report suspicious activities to authorities. The financial services industry had particular interest in these programs because they frequently encountered seniors being pressured into questionable transactions by family members or supposed caregivers. One training session at a major regional bank led to an immediate intervention when a teller recognized the warning signs we'd discussed in a transaction occurring that same afternoon. An 82-year-old customer was attempting to withdraw $15,000 in cash, while accompanied by a much younger man who answered questions directed to her and seemed anxious to complete the transaction quickly. The teller followed our protocols by requesting private conversation with the customer, during which the elderly woman revealed that the man was her nephew, who had convinced her that her bank accounts were being monitored by government agencies and that she needed to withdraw cash immediately to protect her assets. Further investigation revealed that the nephew was struggling with gambling debts and had been systematically terrifying his aunt with conspiracy theories designed to make her distrust financial institutions and rely on his guidance. The intervention prevented a significant theft and led to the nephew receiving mandatory counseling rather than criminal prosecution, preserving family relationships while addressing the underlying problems that had motivated his exploitation attempt. Success stories like these reinforced my belief that education and early intervention were far more effective than prosecution after the fact. Most family members who exploited elderly relatives weren't career criminals, but ordinary people facing financial pressure who rationalized their actions as temporary borrowing or protective intervention. Ashley fell into this category. A person whose financial stress and sense of entitlement had gradually evolved into criminal behavior that she justified as family financial planning. Understanding this progression helped me develop more effective prevention strategies that addressed underlying motivations rather than simply documenting criminal activities. The third year of my practice brought an unexpected opportunity to contribute to state legislation designed to strengthen protections for elderly residents. The New York State Assembly was considering a bill that would require mandatory reporting of suspected elder abuse by financial institutions, healthcare providers, and legal professionals, similar to existing requirements for child abuse reporting. Testifying before the legislative committee felt like the culmination of everything I'd learned since Ashley's attack. Standing in the assembly chambers, addressing elected officials about the realities of elder financial exploitation, I represented not just my own experience but the dozens of families I'd helped protect from similar predators. Honorable committee members, I began my testimony, elder financial abuse is not a crime of opportunity committed by strangers. It is typically a systematic campaign of manipulation conducted by people the victim knows and trusts. Family members, caregivers, romantic partners, and supposed friends account for the vast majority of these crimes. I described Ashley's medication tampering scheme in clinical detail, explaining how she had used her access to my home and my trust in her motives to create a multi-month campaign designed to make me appear incompetent. The committee members asked detailed questions about detection methods, prevention strategies, and the long-term impacts on victims and their families. Mrs. Sinclair, one assemblyman asked, in your professional opinion, how common are schemes like the one you experienced? More common than most people realize, I replied. My consulting practice has handled over 60 cases in 3 years, and that represents only families who were able to recognize the problem and seek help. For every case we see, there are probably several others where the exploitation succeeded without detection. The bill passed committee unanimously and became law 6 months later, establishing New York as a leader in elder abuse prevention and creating the reporting structure that would help other families avoid the isolation and confusion that had nearly allowed Ashley's scheme to succeed. Richard proposed to me on a quiet evening in October as we reviewed case files in my home office. The proposal wasn't romantic in any traditional sense. No restaurant, no flowers, no dramatic gesture. Instead, it emerged from a practical conversation about our professional collaboration and personal partnership. Margaret, he said, looking up from a particularly complex case involving corporate financial exploitation, we've been working together for 2 years now, and I can't imagine returning to a practice that doesn't include your expertise and perspective. Is this a business proposition? I asked with amusement. It's a life proposition, he replied seriously. I want to merge our practices, our homes, and our futures. At our age, we don't need to waste time on conventional courtship rituals. We know what we have together, and we know it's valuable. The practical romance of his proposal suited me perfectly. We'd both been married before, raised children, and navigated the complexities of building lives with other people. This relationship was different, built on mutual respect, shared purposes, and the knowledge that our individual strengths complemented each other professionally and personally. We married in a small ceremony at my house in December, with Michael, the twins, Richard's daughter, and a few close friends in attendance. Ashley was notably absent, which was exactly as it should have been. This celebration marked the beginning of a new chapter, rather than an obligation to maintain artificial family harmony. The twins had adapted beautifully to having Richard as a step-grandfather figure, appreciating his patient explanations of legal concepts and his willingness to help with school projects. Sophia had recently expressed interest in becoming a lawyer herself, inspired by Richard's stories about helping people solve complex problems through legal expertise. "Grandpa Richard," she said during our wedding reception, "when I'm a lawyer, can I work with you and Grandma Margaret to help people like you do now?" The question brought tears to my eyes, realizing that our work was inspiring the next generation to think about service and protection, rather than exploitation and manipulation. Sophia's career aspirations were still years away from reality, but her early interest in justice and advocacy suggested that Ashley's negative influence had been completely overshadowed by positive role models. As we entered my 4th year of consulting practice, now operating as Sinclair Hartman Elder Protection Services, our client base had expanded beyond individual families to include healthcare systems, financial institutions, and government agencies seeking expertise in elder abuse prevention and detection. The irony wasn't lost on me that Ashley's attempt to steal my son's inheritance had ultimately created a thriving business focused on protecting other families from similar exploitation. Her scheme had failed so completely that it had generated its opposite, a professional practice dedicated to empowering seniors and preventing the exact type of abuse she had perpetrated. Michael had recently been promoted to senior engineering manager at his aerospace company, his career advancing steadily as he rebuilt his life as a single father. His relationship with Ashley remained cordial but distant, focused entirely on co-parenting arrangements that prioritized the twins' stability and well-being. The girls were now 10 years old, excelling academically, and showing remarkable emotional maturity in handling their family's complex dynamics. Their college funds continued growing through the offshore trust structure, ensuring that Ashley's failed scheme would ultimately benefit the very people she had endangered through her criminal behavior. Standing in my office on a crisp winter morning, reviewing the case files that represented hundreds of families protected from financial exploitation, I marveled at the journey that had brought me to this point. 5 years earlier, I had been an isolated widow whose own family was plotting against her, vulnerable to manipulation and unsure of my own competence. Today, I was a recognized expert in elder abuse prevention, a successful business owner, a newlywed building a second marriage based on mutual respect and shared purpose, and a grandmother whose legacy would include not just financial security for her family, but professional contributions that protected entire communities from predatory behavior. Ashley had underestimated not just my intelligence and determination, but my capacity for growth and reinvention in my 70s. Her greatest miscalculation had been assuming that age meant vulnerability, rather than wisdom, experience, and the freedom that comes from having already survived most of life's major challenges. The inheritance she had tried to steal through medication tampering and systematic abuse was now safely generating returns in Caribbean financial institutions, completely beyond her reach and growing steadily for the next generation. But the real inheritance I had created was far more valuable, a body of work dedicated to ensuring that other families would never endure what we had survived, and the knowledge that speaking truth to power was possible at any age for those brave enough to try. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.